Good evening, friends and fellow Singaporeans. As you know, the Deputy Prime Minister has just delivered his budget statement. The SDP would like to present our response to the budget. But before we do that, we would like to acknowledge the contributions of all the people involved in the efforts to contain the spread of the SARS-CoV virus, the cause of the COVID-19 epidemic. At a time like this, all Singaporeans need to come together regardless of political affiliation. We strongly support the healthcare workers, scientists, contact tracers, and all the others involved in taking care of patients infected with the virus. However, we know that this virus will pass. It will eventually be controlled by the hard work of people here and elsewhere. But once the virus is gone, we will face once again the same old problems we have faced over the years. The rising cost of living, the attitude of a government which views our country as a corporation and our people as customers, or worse, according to the Trade and Industry Minister. These are problems which will persist long after the virus is gone. We are pleased that the DPM mentioned the problem of climate change, although to be honest, some of his ideas sounded familiar from the Young Democrats' climate change policy. On day-to-day matters, however, we were hoping that there would be some indication that the government had finally started listening to the people. We had hoped that there would be recognition of some of the real problems that local Singapore citizen professionals, managers, executives, and technicians face as they form a growing proportion of all Singaporeans who are retrenched. Unfortunately, the budget was full of little tweaks and complex schemes, but short on bold moves to address the challenges that face all Singaporeans. The PAP government proposes to give us grocery vouchers, GST assurance payments, U-Save vouchers, GST vouchers, rebates for various payments, and temporary assistance for those affected by global economic factors. At the same time, the highly regressive GST, which makes the poor pay a far higher proportion of their income in taxes than the wealthy, is only deferred for a year. This means that the GST rise to 9% could well come in right after the elections, perhaps in the year 2022. There was also no promise to rein in the rises in bus fares, water and electricity charges, school bus fares, and all the other costs which burden Singaporeans. To use a common Singaporean phrase, whenever the PAP government gives you a chicken wing before the elections, you can be sure that after the elections they will try and take the whole chicken back. The SDP feels that there's a better way. Alfred Tan is a Singaporean entrepreneur who has been active in the Singapore Democratic Party, and as a local businessman, he has a far better view of what our economy needs than I do. He will share the SDP's detailed approach to the economy. Take it away, Alfred.
The SDP is glad that the government is responding to the COVID-19 outbreak and finding ways to support businesses and helping workers to keep their jobs. But we are disappointed that the government is sticking to its plans to raise the GST after 2021. This is a concern because the economic impact on Singapore is not going to last just a few months. Consumers and businesses need to know that the regressive GST will not be hiked because it will add greater financial burden to the average consumer. Helping workers. This is an opportune time to implement retrenchment insurance. Crises and economic upheavals, such as the one we are in right now, impacts Singaporean workers quite suddenly, and through no fault nor control of theirs, may lose their jobs because the businesses they work for may not weather the storm. They may find themselves in a very stressful situation as they struggle to find comfort and direction for themselves and their families. The better off may be able to buffer this setback to some extent, but the great number of employees in Singapore who are struggling to make ends meet will certainly be at their wits' ends as their households face uncertain tomorrows. The retrenchment insurance, such as the one the SDP proposes, will help the Singaporean employee tide through this temporary but personally devastating crisis. Specifically, the SDP proposes the Restart Scheme, or Re-employment Scheme and Temporary Assistance for the Retrenched, which works like this. If a worker is retrenched, Restart pays him or her 75% of last drawn salary for the first 6 months, 50% for the second 6 months, and 25% for the final 6 months. The payout stops once the individual is re-employed, or 18 months after retrenchment. And the payout is capped at the prevailing median wage. We urge the government to urgently implement this as soon as possible. Stop the GST hike. Raising GST in the near future, especially with the COVID-19 outbreak expected to be much more global and far-reaching, will be foolish. This outbreak will surely impact us and the world economically and socially, with its effects possibly felt right through the next few years. We call on the government to stop looking at increasing the regressive GST. By better calibrating our GST system, we may not even need the GST voucher fund. The government collects more than 11 billion in GST, which affects everybody no matter how old or how poor you are. And yet it set up the GST voucher fund, which has been paying out about $800 million a year, a paltry 7% of what it collects from GST, to help out the low-income households and the elderly. Instead, the SDP proposes changing the GST system such that zero-rated basic food, necessities, and healthcare would directly benefit the less well-off and vulnerable without them incurring unnecessary cash outflows in the very first place. The government must spare a heartfelt thought for the ordinary Singaporean and not insist on increasing the GST in the next 5 years. Spending prudently with financial discipline. There are a lot of other ways to ensure that our country's budget is balanced and funded. Other than considering the re-implementation of estate duty on large estates and capital gain tax, the SDP also recommends increasing the arbitrary 50% utilization of our country's NIRC. The government should also stop wasteful spending on useless projects and unnecessary expenditure. We don't need another mall like Jewel in Changi. We don't need a T5 airport. We don't need a founders memorial. We don't need to spend 800,000 on a rubbish bin. We don't need tall, shining towers and buildings. We instead want a ear and a heart. Singaporeans want the government to leave a little more cash in our hands and not take away everything from us. As seen from the AGO reports year after year, we don't need a government that overspends time and again, ignoring good prudence and corporate governance practices. If the government is more prudent and careful in its spending, we will not need so much money in the first place as presented in the budget. Responsible cooperation demand discipline and plan the appropriate budget according to their means. If our government cannot handle such discipline, perhaps they should not try to justify their salaries by comparing themselves with the best of our industry and corporate leaders.
Thanks, Alfred. While we return to tackling the virus amidst us, we want to go beyond the epidemic to the real challenges that face our people. We are confronted with a relentlessly rising cost of living that creates stress and tension for Singaporeans. Singaporeans are not looking for handouts. We just want a level playing field. We are a talented and hardworking people. The SDP promises that if you put us in Parliament in the coming general election, we will work hard to build a democratic Singapore based on justice and equality. Thank you.